The 17th of September 1989, I remember it forever because it's a day, it's perhaps the most profound change that I ever made. In those days, I was working 7 days a week, about 100 hours a week. This particular day, I thought I will surprise my wife by getting home early. Just so happened that I'd flown in from, I think I was flying from Melbourne to Sydney that day, and I got a new company car. It was the first company car I ever had that had the electric windows. You know, the thing and they go up and down. So when I left the dealership that day, I'm kind of playing with this and I'm thinking, you know, I started thinking, you know, how cool is this? You know, I started thinking to myself, you know, how cool is it that here's a boy who was born on the wrong side of the tracks, who everyone thought was stupid. And just that one guy, he gave me an opportunity that day. And here I am, you know, in those days, I'm earning more money than my parents saw in most of their lives. You know, we've got a 3-story house, you know, life's pretty good. And I started thinking to myself, in fact, I reckon I was saying to myself, you're pretty bloody good. So you get an idea of how I'm feeling. I reckon people might have been moving over the other side of the road. There's this big head going down the road. This is kind of, but I just wanted you to get a sense of how I'm feeling, because when I get home that day and I'm in my brand new shiny company car, and as I get out of my brand new car and I'm in this mood of how good is this and how good am I, and I see my wife standing at the top of the stairs. She says, "We need to talk." Now, fellas, what does that mean? There's not a man on the planet who doesn't know what it means. Now, we sit down, we talk straight away. She says to me, she actually pointed at me, she said, "You know what? Your children do not know who their father is." Under my breath, I thought, those ungrateful bastards. What about all this money? What about swimming pool? What about this? What about that? Well, I was a bit naive. Then she said something that absolutely rocked me. She said, "And I'm starting to wonder as well." My kids would come into my study and they'd say, "Dad, this will do that." And I'd say, "Piss off, can't you see I'm busy?" That's the kind of man I was then. But it changed me that day. I straight away looked in the mirror and said, you know, the 3 most important people in my life, my wife and my children, I've lost the plot. I left the corporate world 2 weeks later. I've been on a mission ever since, to help people to understand that if you're not a hero in your own home first, you can't be a hero in your workplace. It's very difficult to be a role model in the workplace if you're not one at home. If you haven't got a happy family life, it's very hard to have a happy working life. I may well have been the superstar executive, I may well have been the golden-haired boy, but I tell you, in that moment in time, my children and my wife didn't have a clue who I was. More importantly, I didn't. And it's so bad, you know, I didn't know. As so many blokes don't know. I'll never forget, about a week later, my daughter comes to me and I'm in my study, I'm cleaning out a whole lot of stuff because I've quit. She says, "Dad, you want to get a video?" I went, "Yep, let's go." I'll never forget the look on her face. We got Anne of Green Gables that day, both of them. And that day was one of those days in Sydney where it rained, you know, tropical kind of rain, rains flat out and straight. And I remember us sitting down on the couch and we watched the first one. And all of a sudden I start to cry uncontrollably. Remember, I'm told, you know, if I see you snivelling, I'll take you with an inch. That was how I was brought up. I was taught men don't cry. My daughter had never seen me show emotion. I used to tell my son, if I see you being emotional, look out. I was, you know, following in my father's footsteps. Anyway, my daughter had never seen me be emotional before. But it just all of a sudden dawned on me what's important in life. And it ain't the big job, and it ain't the big check, and it ain't anything to do with that. It's about dealing with real people, dealing with real things, It's about understanding what the things in life that really matter. And I'll never forget it, because that character in the Anne of Green Gables film, she says to the other main character, you know, it's not what the world brings you that's important, it's what you bring to the world. And that's what made me cry that day, because what I was bringing to the world wasn't my best. Even though I'd been through all of these things that have happened in my life, and you know, sometimes it takes, you know, you get run over by a truck, next thing they're going to run over you with a plane. You know, I'm a bit thick sometimes, Lisa, I don't get it. So I'd have all these reminders about, you know, what works and what doesn't, until one day, that day when my wife had the courage, you know, bless her heart, to, you know, confront her male chauvinist, you know, self-centered, you know, pig of a husband. She had the courage to have a crack. And, you know, I think I've demonstrated I do listen at the right time sometimes. But it changed me that day. And so I often leave audiences with the idea that you've got to be a hero in your own home first. You know, I've reflected a lot on that, because I've reflected a lot on my own fatherhood. Because when my dad was alive, you know, he and I were warring our whole lives. I didn't understand, you know, the emotional trauma that people go through when his father's away at the war, as I talked about earlier. And so my dad and I, we were warring, and Dad really wasn't a hero in my eyes. And he was a good man, by the way. He wasn't a bad man. He was a good man. Towards, as it turned out, towards the end of his life, Dad came to see me speak. Unfortunately, my mother never ever saw me talk, unfortunately, which is a real shame. I would have loved to see me, but it never worked. But my dad only came to see me once. Just down here in Box Hill it was. And I had a bunch of men in the room, including my dad and my brother-in-law. And it was about 40 blokes. And we sat in this big circle, you know. And I was giving an open seminar. And so what I do in those environments is I say to people, you know, let's talk about what you'd like to take away, and then we'll design the seminar on the run. So I thought I won't begin with Dad, I'll begin over here. So we went around the room and we got a little thing out, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do for the next sort of hour a bit. We get to Dad, and his opening words were, "I probably will not agree with everything the speaker's going to say this morning." And I thought, here we go. You know, I'm thinking to myself, what the hell did you come for? This is what I'm thinking, you know. But then he says, "I'm real proud he's my son." And that statement changed our relationship right there. So all of a sudden, I went from being the son who was trying not to take after his father to try and not be, but being, and not seeing the good. You see, I made the mistake for seeing my father as he was, not as he could be. Despite all that journey, that everything I've learned, everything I practiced on my employees and everything I learned, one of the reasons I became successful, I realised in that moment I wasn't doing it with my own father. And yet he had the courage. We talked about it later. He didn't quite know what he said in the moment. It just happened to him because he realised himself, you know, unconscious kind of thing, you know, he realised. Now, we were able to make the peace before he passed on. So these kind of things have taught me, you know. So my father wasn't a hero in my home, and I followed in his footsteps. You know, to me he wasn't, even though he was a good man. He wasn't the hero. I wasn't one in my own life. I made all the same mistakes, and even though I had all this learning, sometimes, you know, it just doesn't happen. So this journey isn't easy. You know, it is simple though. You can get it. You can be having a wonderful time at home, and all of a sudden something goes wrong. And you know, my wife and I, we often reflect on this when we fight about things. You know, how many times do you fight about things that really don't matter? How many times, you know, we won't get personal, but how many times, Michelle and Laurie, do you have debates about things that really don't matter? Carlton Collingwood, a lot. Carlton Collingwood, there you go. There you go. Now, what my wife and I have, we've learned, we often say to one another, you know, this doesn't matter. Because most things don't. But the starting place, I believe, is to be a hero in your own home first. I'm pleased to tell you that my son and myself are mates. I often don't think of him as my son. I think of him as my mate. And we were only, and my daughter the same, we were only able to get there because I had to work on myself, as I've been sharing with you. You've got to compete with yourself. See, I can't be responsible for anyone else but me. I've learnt the hard way. And hopefully what I've shared with you today, and when you watch this later on, and other people who watch this, hopefully what you realise most of all, don't do it my way, but learn the principles that I've shared with you in this process and apply them in your own way. Magic happens then, right? Because the principles I've shared with you, I believe, are universal. It doesn't matter what culture, it doesn't matter what country, this works everywhere. So good luck with it. And if you need my help at any time, please give me a call on the support line.